Good morning, all. This is John Dahlberg at Charter School Capital. We're going to get the webinar started in just a minute. We've got more people joining as we speak. Welcome. Thanks for making the time this morning. Yep. All right. Hey, Freddie, good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Hey, all. Thanks for joining. My name is John Dahlberg, and I am the Vice President of Facilities and Development at Charter School Capital. And on my screen left, I'm hoping it's your screen left too, you can see a friend and client of ours who we've been working with for quite some time, Freddie Mendoza, who is the founder and also a teacher at Arizona College Prep in Tucson, Arizona. So welcome. Wave to our audience, Freddie.
Well, hello.
Good morning. Hey, thanks for making the time. I think right now you guys may be seeing a couple of questions pop up. We're going to launch a survey just to understand where you guys are from a planning and where you guys are from a facilities financing perspective. So we're going to give you a minute or two to see those questions, and then we'll launch into the essential steps for facilities financing. Do you really need my survey, Brittany? If you've already answered the first question, thank you. We're watching the registrants fill out the form right now. So when we get critical mass, we'll flip to the second question. We'll talk in more detail about what some of these topics are. Hopefully you have a working familiarity with some of these options already. Okay. And there should be one more question coming at you guys right now, which really speaks to where you as an organization are from a timing perspective. And we'll get into more detail. The challenges and the steps that are before you are largely related to time. So the people who are who are looking for financing immediately, hopefully they're at a different stage of progress than the group or the school that's looking for financing in the fall of 2019 or beyond. So we'll discuss those challenges and how to prepare regardless of where you are in timing. But this will help us tailor our comments to you guys from a timing perspective. Yep, couple more seconds. And then I'll take while some folks are filling out that question, I'll take the time to let you know, you can always submit a question to us. You folks are in listen only mode, but there's a text function, and we've already got a couple of questions in. We'll take your questions, and we have a moderator who will help us sprinkle those questions in as they're appropriate, or at the end, there'll be time for some questions that have been submitted. So feel free to submit that question anytime it works for you during the presentation. Okay, and I think the poll just closed. So thank you all for your feedback on that. Let's just jump right in. The topics today that we're talking about are the essential steps. We've identified 6 of them that are required when you're planning your next facility. So we'll cover these in detail, but really there's an assessment of understanding what your facility needs are and your realities from your budget. There's a planning process regardless of where you're going, what your building is going to look like, whether you're going to own it, whether you're going to lease it, there's a planning process. And then there's the challenges. Sometimes there's challenges, but you have to decide as an organization how you're going to fund your facility. And there's a significant difference across the options for funding there. Then you get into actually pulling the trigger and finding the right location and matching your funding option. And then for some schools, there's a design phase where you make the building exactly what you want it to be. Sometimes that's a ground up construction, and sometimes that's as minor as poking holes in walls and creating windows to make your school more accessible and to create a different feel on the inside. So and then obviously you have to execute either the move, the project, the build. But so we're going to get into the details, but those are, from a linear perspective, those are the steps that you guys will need to cross to successfully navigate the reality of where you are today and the vision that you have for your new facility in the future. So let's start with assessment. We talked about, what you want versus what you can afford. Understanding the amount of space you need is important. And then figuring out the budget, how you're going to fund that, is a critical piece of it as well. So when we talk about the assessment, the total space you guys are going to need is a function, your total space is a function of two things. It's your needs and your wants. And I think the counsel that we share, and Freddie can attest to this, the need of your space should relate to your charter. If you are a performing arts school, you should have a stage, or you should have a performing location. If you're a science school, there's a need to have a science lab of some type. That's a need. The want is a secondary aspect of what you can afford. And the combination of those make up the total space that's required. And I think the piece that we share with our clients is you also have to have you have to have room for your common space. You have to have administrative space. And, we can work with you individually or your architects and your partners, but making sure that when you're setting a budget and you're assessing what you truly need, understanding your common space is an important piece of it. Freddie, I think, you guys, you're very creative in where you use some of you don't have a lot of common space. You have a wide open floor plan. But some schools, if your transition areas are going to be outside, you don't have to pay for that. But if in cold weather climates where you have to protect yourself from rain, things like that, your corridors and your internal spaces actually have a significant impact on the total square footage you'll need in your building. And then we talked about.
I was also.
Yeah, go ahead, Freddie.
Sorry, I was going to add that you should think about, if there's any multi-purpose uses, if you can use a certain space for multiple activities over the course of the day. Because again, where the kids are going to eat lunch, some schools are lucky enough to be able to afford a cafeteria, some schools are not. So how can you fit that in? Those are all things to consider.
Yeah, good point. Multi-purpose spaces are a reality that most charter schools have to contemplate. On slide 6, we're talking about, how you afford things, right? The funding that you have, the funding for your building really comes in 4 different places. One, it's your cash reserves, and it's the balance that you guys have accumulated through successful operations. Then you've got your state, local, and federal funding. That's largely the biggest piece of that. Then there's a public and private fundraising piece of it. Freddie can speak to some of the private partnerships that he has. We know that a lot of your schools have private partnerships. but those pieces are really the sources of your revenue, and how they work in total is how you figure out what your total pie is of what you actually have. They need to match your academic mission. They need to account for your growth. And as I alluded earlier, the specialty requirements that are unique to your charter, those need to be identified as well. And all of those pieces come together and form the amount that you have to spend on your project. Freddie, do you want to talk about a little bit about how you guys balance your sources of revenue?
Well, we're a very small school. We have about 100 students, and we mostly rely just on the state funds. There's not a whole lot of other sources in terms of things that we budget for and plan for. We use tax donations to do, some specialty things or some, additions and enhancement to the curriculum. But for the most part, we just pretty much stay to the state funds. What I would say though is in the budget plan, and I think this is part of the assessing, is just to be extremely conservative. I know as educators we're mostly dreamers and hopers, and we always are expecting the best. And in terms of budgeting, it very seldom works out that way.
Yes, that's good guidance. Being conservative also allows for challenges around funding levels, deferrals. Some of the states in the past, California, Arizona, Minnesota, have had deferrals. Some states are fortunate enough to have funding for facilities, right? California has SB 740, Minnesota has lease aid, Florida, there's some capital outlay funds. So all of that, in addition to your state aid, in places that should be accounted for if your school qualifies and your state actually funds it.
Absolutely.
The slide 7 is an illustration that we have created to show you the proportional dollars that a school earns and has available to spend and how they could impact a potential budget. So on one axis we have the size of the project, and on the bottom axis we have the annual school revenue. So it might be obvious, but this is an illustration. As your school revenue grows and you allocate funds to pay your teachers, to build your curriculum, to run the school, the size of the facilities dollars that you can allocate to your building actually increases. So what we've shown here is a range of values, and this is available. You guys can download this on SlideShare when we're done. You can take a look at the amount of revenue that you allocate to your school, to your facility at 10% of your total revenue, at 15% of your total revenue, at some cases 20% of your revenue, depending on the funding that your school receives or the cost of your real estate. All of that is going to impact the total dollars that you can allocate towards your facilities project. And this is a chart that illustrates that for you guys to use in the future. So let's talk about planning. Freddie talked about timing a little bit. Setting a realistic timeline is important. And I think to Freddie's point about being conservative, there will be setbacks. We can use positive language and opportunities or challenges, but there's going to be things that are going to test your calendar. And this is a theme that we're going to come back to. When you're planning, make sure you have a list of must-have features, because being true to your charter and your academic mission is first and foremost. It should be visible in your building as you move forward. So we talked about it. Freddie, you can speak to probably how long it took you to actually connect with and build a plan that actually worked. Whether you're whether you're building something, whether you're doing a TI project, there's going to be a large amount of time. There's going to be a large group of people involved, from your board to your staff to your parents. Plan ahead. There's going to be some form of disruption, and if that is a hidden cost, but an important piece of any facility's migration. We're going from location A to location B. It's great when you get there, but the process is going to have some bumps and leave you potentially bruised if you don't plan ahead. Freddie, do you agree? You want to share some timing, share some scars on that one?
Again, we have a kind of unique situation in that we were already in a building and we had a system and a history, but we were looking to move into a new program, or a new building. So we had a program, we had a mission, we had a philosophy. Definitely talk to your staff and your families, your board, about what you need. I think that is a really important point. And it's not just what you need, like square footage wise, what you need to run the sort of school that you're wanting to run. I think there's exterior things to think about. Do I need a play area? Do I need to be located on a public transportation line? Do I need a public park nearby? You just got to think about the student experience and what the families need. And so anyways, we had that set in mind. And then, I was looking, my family still laughs. I mean, probably for 2 years, every single drive anywhere in town was looking at buildings, planning on buildings, talking about buildings, thinking about how would our mission work in that building. So you got to have a lot of different creativity and different ways of looking at things. But the only way you can be creative about it is if you know what you absolutely need. So some buildings just will not work, and some buildings, can work. If you're starting from scratch and building your own building, then that's a whole different scene, but equally important to know what you must have.
Right. And again, the charter should be your mission. The charter is your mission statement for your educational experience, and your charter should also be visible and living in your building. And that's, we've talked about it. It's external space, it's physical, it's geography, it's the collaborative spaces versus the traditional hallways. It's whatever you want to deliver. It should be evidenced. Your charter should be evidenced in your building. So let's talk a little bit about once you've assessed what you need and you've talked about you're starting to build a plan. At some point in time, you're going to need to fund your dream. So we're going to talk about the different options. We're going to talk about some of the pros and cons, and then we're going to highlight a rubric or a construct for, not a rubric, but we're going to highlight a construct for you to think about how the pros and cons are best for your school, your long-term strategy, what your board wants to accomplish. So this chart here, if you think about the ways to fund a school, and I think we asked you these questions, what alternatives are you considering as part of the poll? The funding your building is very simple. You can do it with 100% cash, and that's really easy if you have cash. This is what we're looking at here is a $7 million project. Your project may be $3 million, your project may be $10 million. It's irrelevant. If you're going to do it with cash, you have to have all that cash up front. Some of the more traditional routes that people are familiar with is there's a bank. A bank will lend you some of the money for your building, but they won't lend you all of the money. So there's going to need to be equity that your school is going to have to bring to the table. And some people are familiar with bonds. Bonds have been a traditional source of funding around since the beginning of charters. 12, 13% of the charter school population have acquired a bond in the history of charter schools. So it's a traditional source. It requires more work up front, but requires far less capital. And then the fourth source is the long-term lease. And that is where basically you are a long-term tenant. It's interest-only financing. It's 100% solution. There's usually little to no dollars or equity that's required for your school to get into a long-term lease, maybe at the margin. But those are really the 4 alternatives. And we've highlighted here some of the compare points of each of those criteria. So let's go back and talk about cash on an annual cost basis, an underwriting basis, and then let's look at security and what that means for your growth, right? As I said, if you have all cash, then your project is very simple to get approved. There's very little underwriting that's required. You just write a check. The growth options, well, if you're in a growth mode and you want to go from a middle school program to a high school program and you're going to use cash, you need more cash to build. How long that takes you is a function of your revenue and your surpluses. Some schools are doing that. That's a very hard alternative to execute, but it's very easy on you from an annual cash flow perspective once you do it. The banks, we'll spend a little time talking about the banks. I'll tell you this, your market is different. The equity requirements in Florida versus the equity requirements in California versus North Carolina, they're very different. But the commonality in the bank transaction is you will need some portion of equity, and you'll need to qualify for some portion of debt, some portion of loan that the local bank or a national bank will provide to you. Again, there's a range of values here and how much cash you'll need. You'll need, from an underwriting perspective, this is the first significant change. Most banks are requiring a significant history of operating surplus and operational experience. Most young schools, 1, 2, 3 years, are usually not qualifying for bank financing for 2 reasons. 1, they don't have the track record, and 2, they don't have usually the required equity to balance the debt. So that's a challenge, that's a challenge that younger schools are going to have. The growth options, as we talked about in a growth mode, at the point in time in which you want to refinance back to the hypothetical middle school into a middle school, high school campus, you've got to refinance all of that. And there's market rates, there's the risk tolerances of your lending community that you have to deal with. So growing with a bank loan can be done. It just requires the entire process to start over each time you're looking for additional capital. Bond, same thing. There's usually less years of required surplus and operating history for bond. The underwriting criteria is very similar in all of these categories. The question really becomes, how much cash do you have to invest in a bond? How much time do you have to invest in a bond? And what do you want to do down the road? The growth options you face the same challenges when you're trying to grow when using bond financing. Typically, bond contracts require the refinance period to be 7, 10 years long before you can refinance a bond. Not always, but that's a common covenant that may impede your growth if you're trying to grow using a bond solution. And finally, the long-term lease, it's a little bit of all of the above, right? There's very little cash that's required. The annual cost is comparable with other traditional services that are doing 100% financing or some type of debt and equity financing. The underwriting criteria for long-term leases tends to be a little bit more flexible and a little bit more creative. And there's no security interest. It doesn't land on your balance sheet, which allows you other financing options. And more importantly, from a lease perspective, and Freddie can talk about the building next door to his property. it's scalable. When your landlord, when you're leasing a building, there's nothing that prevents growth other than the willingness of your landlord to invest more in your school. That's one of the things that we're excited about at Charter School Capital is we want to invest more and more in all of our schools. So the combination, you can see the range of, and I'll go to the next slide here. The challenges of what you do and when you do it is largely tied to your age and your size. And here's an illustration of that exact point. The longer your school has been around, the larger your school is, you're going to have more ability, not more, but you're going to have a different set of options than typically a smaller school with less time. So this illustration shares with you where the investor community usually finds sweet spots. For instance, bond transactions under $5 to $7, $10 million are usually hard to come by because those transactions are very expensive to execute. Conversely, the short-term lease that is $1, $2, $3 million projects, those are easier to come by than a bond because there's more investors who are willing to partner with your school for a startup school, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. There's more flexibility in that smaller scale. And these aren't absolutes, but this will give you an illustration around what options you have based on the age and size of your school. Freddie, that's largely theoretical, and you guys have a long-term lease. Do you want to chime in there and share some experience?
Well, there was a couple points that I would make. One, absolutely, the most difficult thing for a new charter school is getting a facility, and for all the same reasons, is nightmare upon nightmare trying to deal with bank investors, trying to deal with people to work with us in any way. For the first 3 years, I think, probably, went to presentation after presentation. They loved our mission, they loved the leadership, they loved what it was doing, but we were just too small. We didn't have a history. So lots and lots of no's. Cannot stress that enough. Until you've been around for 3 to 5 years, and most of them want 5 years, it's very difficult to get banks or a lot of even investors to look at you. So that was a major plus for us working with Charter School Capital. Then the other thing I was going to say, which might go back to the last slide, but I think everybody can follow it, is, most of us are educators at heart. That's what gets us into charter schools. And you just have to have a team that has a lot of shared experiences. I don't know all that much about bonds, and I've been in the charter school business now for 20 years, but always been in a small school. I am lucky enough to have partnered with somebody who's very much in the banking and financial world, so she covered a lot of that. But you got to be willing to grow. You got to be willing to understand where your strengths are and where you need your team to help out. And then obviously, I think this is the one area where everybody's individual needs and demands and localities and all of that probably play the biggest, difference.
Yep, that's a great point, Freddie, and that leads to this. We talked about kind of an evaluation criteria. This is an example project of $5 million for learners who like colors and charts differently than the numbers. But this is a comparison that is an illustration of how cash, traditional bank, bond, and long-term leases, how they compare relative to one another. So as we mentioned, right, from a cash perspective, if you're funding with cash, you need all of your cash up front. That is proportionally harder, as evidenced by the red bubble, than say a long-term lease where you need no capital up front versus all your capital. that's the comparison that we're making here. And to Freddie's point, each one of these comparisons is going to be unique to your school. Your school may be 15 years old. They may have filled out all of the students that they filled out. Their space works exactly the way they want it to work. You may be looking for a bond financing. It's longer term. If you understand the total cost of a bond transaction and you want to be there for 30 years, that can technically, not technically, the math on that can work to your advantage. The growth that you have in a long-term lease might not be attractive. So this is a comparison, and there's a $5 million comparison on slide 14. And if you look, you can see as the project gets bigger, the comparisons actually change, right? So at $20 million, a traditional bank might not be willing to lend $15 million or $16 million for one specific school. But a bond, all of a sudden that gets really easy for them because it fits their risk profile. So this is, again, another tool that for you guys to organize how you compare options against your specific mission and your specific stage of your school. So how do you acquire that? If you've gone through the process of planning and assessing and planning and figuring out how you want to fund your transaction, how do you go there? So let's talk about leasing versus purchasing, because that's really the two differences is, purchasing and leasing. Find your site, understanding the requirements of that site and how they work against your mission inside the rules and regulations of your charter and your local municipalities. Those are all important pieces of it. So let's talk about how you're going to acquire. And we use that term broadly, but really the key question that your board has to answer as they set this strategy is, do you want to own or do you want to control? Leasing is control. If you use a bond or you are using traditional debt financing, you technically own it. There are, in another presentation that we speak to, we dive into these details quite extensively. But here's the question that you guys have to understand, and your board has to understand: what do we want to do? What's our mission? Do we want to own or do we want to control? And that's very specific and unique to each one of your schools. The other piece in the acquisition phase, regardless of whether you're going to do a lease or a bond or a bank, however, once you find a site, is the piece that will challenge you is your time and expertise is very, very, very valuable. And I think Freddie can speak to this, is the understanding that if you're spending time looking for a site, it's going to impact your ability to teach kids, to do professional development. It's an important component of the process, is understanding your time. And then I think from a lease and an ownership perspective, understanding what you want to do long term, the real estate market is going to change. And when that changes, it may or may not impact your growth stage. And that's one of the challenges that you have to assess when looking at ownership versus control. If you own, again, it's that market risk of refinancing your bond, refinancing your bank debt. Those two things have to come together at the right time for you and your school if you want to continue to grow. So, Freddie, points that you want to share there. I know that you and your leadership team, you've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what your solution was going to look like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the decision about control versus ownership is really critical. I know for our board and our team, it generally came down to what business do we want to be in? Are we in the education business or are we in the real estate business? Most of us had no passion to be in the real estate business. So, you know, you got to swallow the pill, you got to do what you need to do to get it done. But at the end all be all, we want to be in the classroom, working with kids, working with teachers to educate. I don't want to be, you know, dealing with real estate issues and working out, you know, what we have to work on, different things. That's our specific situation. You know, we're a small school. We don't really want to have a big bureaucracy or big districts or entire people that are set up to deal with some of these things. So it made a lot of sense to us. If you're a bigger school that, you know, can have a full-time person who's working on things, then your situation may be very different. But for us, the conversation that we kept continually asking ourselves and the board asking us is, what business are we trying to be in? And the answer kept being education.
Right. That's a good point, Freddie. And it very much is, you know, your boards are a wide range of people. Your staffs are, some, to Freddie's point, some have less staff, and some of you have more staff with different expertise. It really does depend on what expertise you have and how you want to allocate it. The point on the next slide, I think we've started to talk about it, and it's very unique to your school, and that is the understanding. And to Freddie's point, Freddie was looking for a building that was on a commercial thoroughfare where his students had very specific access, mass transit. He was very dialed in on what he needed, and that made our search of what requirements and the zoning uses that were required for his building, that made it fairly simple. Please be careful when you guys are targeting a building to know how it's zoned. And this is one of those tips that we were sharing earlier about time. There's somebody before you, whether it's another school that has gone through this process before you. In your municipality, there are land use attorneys, some of which have charter school experience. There are charter school consultants that are real estate specific. To Freddie's point, if your board or your staff doesn't have the expertise, talk to one of your neighbors. There are professionals in your market that can help you focus and help identify and focus on the issues of your building. And it's critical to your success, because this will cause you pain emotionally, and it will cause you pain from a time perspective if you don't pin that down.
Absolutely. I would just add that there are realtors and there are landlords who will think that they're experts and they just don't know. Because again, depending on where you are, schools have very different requirements. So I've learned about parking, I've learned about, you know, handicap access, obviously, but then more, well, lesser known to me, but equally damaging. I've heard many schools get stuck with an airflow. You know, it's fine for businesses, it's fine for offices, but you can't have kids in that building because there's not enough fresh air coming in. There's those sorts of technical zoning issues. So not just like, can we have a school here, but all the other secondary and even tertiary, you know, things that you have to really be specific about.
Yeah, that's a great point, Freddie. It is, again, it comes back to, what is your mission want to be? If you understand how the zoning, how the permitting and design process impacts a physical building and the education code, if you have that expertise on your board or in your charter, that's a rarity and a luxury. But there are other people out there that can help you fit that puzzle together, obviously. So the next question is talking about design, and we've hit on some of these, and Freddie just started to talk about the building permits and some of the operational issues that are required. So let's poke into this one. When you're talking about designing either a ground up school or changes, Freddie talked about some of the changes that he made. They made significant interior changes, but they didn't have to erect 4 new walls. Again, make sure that you're considering the the expense and the disruption for your students, right? What is design the outcome with the students in mind, I think is, and Freddie, you guys did a great job of this from your mission. You knew what you wanted on the inside, and we worked with an architect to make it happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The only thing that I would add here is just to say, again, it all just has to line up. There's so many moving parts. I think people get stuck on one aspect of the move or another aspect of the move and not the actual, there's a lot of teeth on these gears that all have to come together just right too, because at least in Arizona now, our summers are down to 7 or 8 weeks. And if you're trying to get permitting and construction and then, clean up and ready for kids to move in, that's the summer break. Obviously, every other break is even smaller than that. So again, every locality has a different situation, but to try to smash a major construction project into 7 weeks, everything has to run very smoothly.
Right. Well, and I think to your point about things lining up, there's also a dance that many schools have to figure out, which is how do you design your expansion and your growth in line with the students that you have. So 2-3 years down the road, you may envision 300 additional students in your building. It might be a financial reality and a time reality, to Freddie's point, that you can't afford or do all of that work today. So there's a staging and a phasing that can be examined, and many schools that we work with and we've seen grow in stages. That is a great, safe, back to Freddie's point about being conservative. You want to grow and design your growth in a manner that doesn't jeopardize the success and the health of your existing students at the cost of the students that are in front of you. And I think that's sound advice, Freddie. We've talked a little bit about this from a design perspective. There are professionals who are charter experts in most of your states. If you don't know them, we can help you find them. I don't swing a hammer, but we know people who do. Freddie has worked with an architect in the Tucson area that specializes in charter schools. Those architects are in North Carolina, where I live. They're in Tucson. They're in Los Angeles. They're out there, and they will help you. There are mission-driven people who will support your school. And then, we've talked about it, right there. Please ask for help. Your peers, your state associations, the national association, there are people who can help you who have been through this process. And it's exciting to share Freddie's experience, because somebody on this phone is in Freddie's chair or where he was 3 years ago. And that's the exciting piece that we hope to share with you guys today. Freddie, anything that we haven't covered?
I think we covered it. I just want to really emphasize peers. Charter school leaders want to help. They want to offer their experience. It's kind of like when you do a home repair and you learn it all when you're fixing your home, and then by the time you know everything that you will do better next time, you're not going to probably do that job again. I feel like charter schools learn all kinds of stuff in this move-in process. And then, if everything goes well, we're probably not going to move a whole lot more times. So we want to share that experience. And, at least in Arizona, charter's been around for 20 years now. There's a lot of us who have a lot of experience that we are looking to share. And then we have state associations and different things like that too. But really asking the questions. People know you're not probably in a unique situation that's never been seen before. There's somebody who has some helpful advice to what you're going through. Right.
That's right. And then Freddie talked about Freddie's example of the air handler, right? Once you identify a site that's going to work for you and is zoned properly for you to actually have kids there, there's still more paperwork. There's the permitting process, whether you're making a small improvement or you're making a major ground up construction. the building permits to make your dream a reality can prove challenging. And, you know, we've talked about the system and the team that you're building, whether it's internal or whether it's with some of the external partners, your real estate agents, the architects, your contractors, land use attorneys, not so much land use attorneys, but your execution team, your builders, your architects, and your funding partners are all going to have expertise to help you understand what's required, whether it's a conditional use permit in California, or you're exempt from the use permit, or the air handling specifications that Freddie was talking about. There are people who, the same way you all are experts in building a curriculum and developing staff, there are experts out there who can help you work through that process. And it's, again, there's paperwork and there's timing and there's bureaucracy involved, and that can lead to time and frustration.
Yep.
So, and then if you've made it this far and you know what you want and you can fund it and you've figured out a location that works, then you just have to do it. You have to execute, and the fun part of moving in. So from an execution standpoint, we've talked about a team, and there's another layer of team at this point in time. Unless you guys, again, have staff that have really good project managers that have capacity in their day, or you have board members who understand how to keep a project on budget, on time, going through the zoning process, acting as an owner's rep. There's the reality of going to your new space needs some oversight and some supervision. And there's project managers out there. We routinely use owner's reps that help keep the project on track. And Freddie mentioned there's, you know, your realtor, your commercial realtor may help you depending on the complexity, but there again, this is not something that you would, the larger the project, the more sophisticated, the greater the risk. You want to have people who are professionals and focused on it. And these are examples of people who can help you keep your project focused and on track. Freddie, I mean, your project was relatively small, and we provided these services for you, but any other experiences your peer group has had for larger scale moves?
Yeah, there's lots of stories. I think I would just simply say that the execute stage is where all the fun happens, but it's also where all the details and problems happen, right? Like, they're all been theoretical, it's been on paper, it's been in our minds. Now it's actually starting to happen. So, you know, a permit gets held up for 3 days down at City Hall, and all of a sudden there's a lot of other things that need to now shift. Or the tile guy, you know, got sick and couldn't get the tile job done when he thought he could. Now other things need to shift. So again, I think there's just a lot of moving parts. So the communication and the ability of the team, keeping the ideal mission and plan is what's really important. You know, an afternoon of no communication can set a plan off a course. So I think, again, just communication, and really when the exit stage hits, hours matter.
Right. That's a great point, Freddie. And I think this is a summary of, you know, 27 pages of Gantt charts where our team lays out how all these pieces link together. But you can definitely see to Freddie's point, this should be the exciting phase where you can see all your hard work starting to come to a physical, tangible reality, and it should be exciting. And Freddie talked about it, right? The making sure that you're communicating with your team that's executing, but also with your team and your staff and your parents that are going to be impacted, right? This is going to be a challenge, and the reward is going to be worth the work. So keeping your team in the loop, right? Your parents excited as to what's happening, but also transparent, communicating with your students. I mean, Freddie, I mean, you know, grand openings are the end of this process, but I know, you know, you were very communicative with your parents so you could, and your students, so you could set expectations. And to that point, Freddie, you had volunteer days, right? I mean, people get excited about throwing paint on the wall.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just going to say rumors are damaging. So, you know, you're from opening and it still looks like a construction site. Prospective students, they're all happening. So they need a voice, right? You need to have shared that with them. You need to be talking. You need to be inviting them in if you want them to help out or see what's going on. Again, I think when you're silent or when you're just busy, nose to the grindstone working, that's when things start to get said or things start to get worried about that can be damaging.
Right. And again, I think we talked about it, right? Social media, communicating, right, of what you're doing, when you're doing it, social media, email, traditional channels, word of mouth. We talked about painting parties, the dedication ceremony where people get to inscribe the walls, fun things, anything to create community and excitement at the end of your project so that they can understand what's coming when and they can be a part of the end of it. Is a great way to keep your community engaged and motivated and aware of what's in front of them.
Absolutely.
So that's the end of the material that we have covered for you, and I'm going to look to see if there's been any questions that have submitted that we can answer. What's that? Great. So the question that was submitted was, if a school already has purchased property, is working with charter school capital an option? And the answer is yes. So that is that's a less common approach, but it's a great approach because what it does is it allows the school has control of the site. Now, some of the first questions that charter school capital or any funding source is going to ask you guys is, how is the building, how's the land zone? Can we actually erect a school? How big can the school be? But those are all questions that we've talked about are going to be required in any process, whether it's bonds, whether it's a debt solution, or whether you use cash, right? Make no mistake about it. If you guys own cash, the land has to work to be a school. But absolutely, we'd love to work with you if you guys own the land and are looking for a way to erect your new school. The question was, will charter school capital assist a startup school in helping pay for a land use attorney and some of the zoning challenges? The answer is yes. Those costs are usually included in the total project cost. So the way your lease payment will ultimately work, the way your bond payment will work, the way your rent payment, your mortgage payment will work if you use traditional debt financing, is all of the costs will go into the project, and there'll be some functionality of the total project cost, which translates to your rent. So that's traditional. There's also another way to do that, and we've seen some schools do this, where the school actually invests those dollars to get the property zoned, to hire their own owner's rep. That cost is actually considered equity that doesn't make its way to the lease payment, the mortgage payment, or the bond payment. So the school has options. Your school has options whether you roll that into the project or you actually pay for it and reduce your mortgage.
Can I jump in there?
Absolutely, Freddie.
Yeah, I was just nodding and nodding while you were talking, because to us, that was one of the biggest advantages, is we could work all of those things in, and then not have to pay for it up front. So, you know, we did an entire parking lot re-asphalting, and we had different people involved in things that we probably would have kept on our want list, not our need list, if we had to pay for it up front. But being able to, you know, spread it out, again, those early years are tough. So being able to work it into the monthly payment and spread it out over years was really a benefit to us.
Yep. And I think, and I'll add one more layer of detail on that last question. If your school is contemplating a transaction, 100% financing is very doable through several sources. The risk of the transaction and the appeal to the investment community and funding sources grows as the school invests in the project. So to Freddie's point, or I'm sorry, to the question that was delivered, if a school has funds and can inject them in the project for either the land or for the costs associated with bringing the project out of the ground, any of those investments from the school help increase your success and provide you greater flexibility down the road. So those are I guess I would make sure that you, as the asker of the question, you have options. You can finance it, or you can use it to your advantage if you can afford it. And we have one more question, I think.
Can you explain more about how to assess temporary lease location before building your own site? You mentioned air handler, ADA, and
Yes. So the question was, can we talk a little bit more about how to assess a short-term lease solution as a growth phase to a longer, more permanent facility? The short-term leases are a fantastic option for many schools, right? It's cliche that you hear charter schools start in the basement of a church, but that's the reality. If you think of a church, they've got all sorts of excess capacity, usually on days that aren't Sunday or Wednesday night. So a short-term lease with either in a church or any other space that allows you to do the critical thing of establish your footprint in the community, attract students, build an academic history that any long-term funding provider is going to look for is a home run. And we've got some other content on our website and some other webinars where we dig into this, but your goal as a young school should be find kids to deliver a great education and establish a track record of success academically and operationally, so you can amass the capital and the track record that allows people to invest in you in the future.
And this question is for Freddie specifically.
Okay.
How was Arizona College Prep Academy able to afford with only 150 students?
Great question. So thank you for your questions. You keep them coming as long as you want, and we'll stay as long as we have questions. So I want to respect your time, but if there are still questions, we'll answer them. Freddie, this question was specific to you, and it's a great one. The question was, hey, how can Arizona College Prep afford a building with only 150 students?
Wow. We are a very lean team. Most of us that are on staff wear multiple hats, and we've been together now for a long time. So it's a hard thing to say, but there's a lot of community history. We have a lot of alumni support and people who just support the program because of the work we do and the mission that we have. But mostly it's a very, very lean program. So when I was talking about multiple use of space and different things like that, that's really important. We have some big partnerships. We do a lot with the national park in the area. We do a lot with the university in the area, the community college in the area. I could talk more details, at a different time or in a different venue, but mostly I think it's just creativity. You have to build a team that has a lot of different skills and works together really well. And you have to try to get rid of redundancies and duplicate effort. And then you just have to partner. When I see charter schools that are successful versus not, a lot of it comes down to that independent ego versus partner. And so again, my short answer, hats, and then just an ability and a willingness to support partnerships.
Right. And so two follow-ups I'd make on that. One is on this screen and available to you is our contact information. When Freddie's not doing founder work and not doing teacher work and not coaching soccer or track or one of the other 19 things, he's got an email address. I'm sure he'd be happy to share, individually if you had questions. I'll do the same thing. My email is on screen. The point I would make to Freddie and to the person who asked the question is Freddie's being modest. He did all of those things, but there's also a reality that a good funding partner will force the school to flow in, to be disciplined about. The shortest answer is your school with 150 kids we will finance a project for that. We've done it. The challenge is making sure that you get the right amount of space in the right location, and you don't have to acquire it at a rate that your school can't afford based on its revenue. But the plan, the steps that we've talked about walking through are applicable to a school that has 150 students in it, the same way they're applicable to the school that has 1,500 in it. It's the exact same process. The budget realities, it's all the same. So don't be disheartened that your small school can't control its own facility. That's a falsehood that we should cut off right there. Brittany, are they still coming in? That was it?
Yeah, no.
Okay. All right. Well, everyone, thanks again for your time. We're going to get you out 2 minutes after. So much. We appreciated the questions, and feel free to contact us if you have follow-up. The content will be available on our website or SharePoint. I'm not sure. I'm getting head nods. Our website. Yes.
You'll also get an email.
Yes, and easier, you'll get an email. So thank you all, and have a great day, and good luck. We wish you continued success as you change the students' lives in the communities you serve. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Thank you.